Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of To The Point with me, Frank Pereira, on Sabha television. I have a very special guest with me on the program this week. He needs no introduction, but I have to introduce on the program Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament from Tirunelveli and Senior Congress Leader. Thank you so much, Mr. Tharoor, for being with us on the program.
Nice to be here, Frank.
So, one issue that's been in the news and that's grabbed the limelight the whole of last week was the NSG issue. And the Congress was very critical in the way the government approached the issue and handled the entire issue surrounding NSG. So why was the Congress so critical of everything that happened?
Well, I'd say there were a couple of flaws in the government's approach. First of all, that they made such a big deal out of this. It was highly contestable. What we had wanted from the NSG, the principal thing, was the waiver we got in 2008. Membership was a desirable icing on the cake, but it was not the main cake. Then the government managed to sort of spin on background that it was all about to happen. Having made it a prestige issue, they called in a number of journalists and told them it was going to happen in Seoul, that China was not an obstacle, that China was on board, all other countries were on board. The Prime Minister had traveled to various countries and carried the day, and they were all going to support him and so on. And then it turned out they were completely wrong. They had misread the tea leaves. Some of the very countries the Prime Minister had spoken to expressed considerable reservations in Seoul, and of course China obstructed it quite bluntly.
So it was,
and so there was a loss
egg in the
of
face on the government, you would say. And but what went wrong, Dr. Tharoor? I mean, how could we have handled the situation differently?
Well, first of all, as I said, we don't think this was a necessary thing for us to put so much of national prestige and effort behind. I think what we should have done was say that the NSG's main requirement, as far as we are concerned, has been accomplished. It would be nice to be a member, but we will try and work gently until we've made sure that all the chips have fallen in the right places. And only when the situation is ripe and without too much of tom-tomming, we go ahead and get it done. When you elevate an issue to this degree of media visibility, you are either 100% sure you're going to get your way, or you're going to end up with egg on your face, and egg on your face is what the government has got.
After what has happened with the NSG, do you think that we should relook our China policy and, look at China differently and engage China differently?
Look, we can't wish away our neighbors, right? The Chinese happen to be our biggest neighbor by far. They're also a country with which we have very, very major trade relations, about $70 billion a year. They're a country with which we fought a war just 5 decades ago, and they're a country with which we still have the world's longest unresolved frontier dispute. So China is a reality we can't get away from. This is part of our foreign policy orientation to the world. They are sitting right there where they are across the Himalayas, and at the same time, they are a country with which confrontation is something that would be foolish for us to engage in. That doesn't mean we sell or mortgage our self-respect. We have to see what our strengths are. We have to understand what their strengths are. We have to choose the grounds on which we can cooperate. I'm personally a bit surprised that we haven't explored more constructive areas of cooperation with them. One example that I've often used, and I will use it again because it's important, is that I feel very strongly that China has a shared interest with us in keeping open and keeping secure the sea lanes of communication across the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, right from the Gulf and East Africa, past India, through the Straits into the South China Sea and China. So why would we have to see ourselves in a zero-sum sort of game with China on these issues, when in fact we both have the same interest? We've allowed ourselves, unfortunately, it seems, to think about China as trying to strangulate us and have bases around us and so on. So first of all, we're not going to be that easy to strangle. And second, and more important, why would they want to do any damage to our interests when it comes across to these shipping lanes? Because it'll hurt them too. They want their goods to go freely and unimpeded. We want our goods to go freely and unimpeded up to here, and they want it to go further, and of course in the reverse sense. And it seems to me that we could have turned to the Chinese and said, hey, let's start talking about cooperation on the Arabian Sea. Let's start talking about cooperation in the Indian Ocean. Let's think about joint patrols against Somali pirates, for example. Why shouldn't we do that sort of thing? We haven't done it. Now, that's one example. There are broader areas of multilateral cooperation where our interests are not necessarily hostile. There may be a sense of competition on the part of China, for example. We've had a successful Mars rover mission. They haven't. We've had some significant advances on issues of cyberspace and outer space, where the Chinese are either behind us or on a different track altogether. But on many other multilateral issues, including economics cooperation issues, we can do well, and we are cooperating with them on things like the BRICS Bank, the new development bank,
Yes.
on the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which China set up. India has been very cooperative. Have we taken all these to a larger pattern and said to the Chinese, look, here's all the areas we can cooperate on. Why do we want to jeopardize this by quarreling over other matters?
But don't you think that there is an effort from the Indian government? We've seen the Prime Minister himself reach out to the to Xi Jinping of China and try and work out some kind of a formula. I mean, there is an effort from India's side, and we can see that.
There is, and I'm certainly not one of those who says that every blame in everything that goes wrong should be laid at New Delhi's door. On the contrary, you asked why have we been critical as a party? We have been critical for these reasons. If you ask me, does India have a number of policy positions on which the Congress party agrees with the government, I would say yes. I've always been of the view, and my party has been of the view, that our political differences should stop at the water's edge. We are one country. We shouldn't be speaking so much of a BJP foreign policy or a Congress foreign policy, but of an Indian foreign policy. And I'm proud of the fact that in my committee, the Committee on External Affairs, I have a BJP majority, but we speak with one voice, and we've had practically very, very little disagreement on some of the big issues confronting the nation. That's how it should be. But in politics, there is always legitimate ground for criticism. And I must admit that part of the duty of the opposition is to point out when the government goes wrong.
Indeed.
That is meant in a constructive spirit and not in an anti-national spirit, to use that phrase that has become so popular in recent months.
There was some consolation as far as the nuclear technology or missile technology is concerned, because MTCR, we got membership to that.
Well, China wasn't a challenge because China is not a member.
No, but China has been trying to get into to the regime from 2004, and they've been trying really hard since 2004 to get into the regime. But India has managed to get in, and we can now develop BrahMos technology with Russia, and we can probably sell to Vietnam because they've shown interest in the BrahMos missiles, in the past as well. So that's certainly some kind of consolation, wouldn't you say?
Look, I mean, there are 4 or 5 significant international agreements of this nature. There's Wassenaar, there's MTCR, and so on. But NSG is the one that our government elevated to the issue it did. You've seen this in our media, as you yourself began the conversation by saying this has dominated the media for the last week. That's why we feel that it's fair ground to criticize the government.
Okay, let's move on and talk about something else now, and let's talk about the foreign policy on the whole, because the government has completed 2 years, and we've seen the Prime Minister speak to a private channel about how the government has performed over the last 2 years, and he's quite happy. And we've seen that the Prime Minister himself has taken it upon himself to spearhead India's foreign policy. Is that the way forward? Is that the right thing to do?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister has brought a lot of personal commitment, energy and dynamism, and he's been prepared to run around the world at an extraordinary level, and I think that's something we should certainly applaud. Obviously, as an opposition party, we will occasionally joke about his frequent absences from our country and from our parliament sometimes, but that's all right. I mean, I would say that if you look substantively at what he's doing, his travels are certainly a plus. At the same time, you can't treat foreign policy as a series of prime ministerial visits. There has to be sustained follow-up. And there is, unfortunately, some very, very legitimate grounds for concern that sustained follow-up is not happening. The foreign minister, as you may have noticed, never accompanies the prime minister on any of his trips. She's not privy to his conversations. She's not there when he's meeting these people, and therefore she has no basis. In fact, her counterparts in those countries are probably accompanying their heads of state and government when they talk to our prime minister, but our foreign minister is not. I'm sure that puts her at a humiliating disadvantage when it comes to follow-up conversations.
Looking at the present scenario, would you say then we could do away with the foreign minister?
No, though I must say that I've heard and been hurt by some people in Delhi sort of disparagingly referring to our foreign minister as the Minister for Consular Affairs, because she seems to have to spend all her time in extricating Indians out of consular difficulties in foreign countries, rather than in actually doing any substantive foreign policy negotiating, which all seems to be happening out of the PMO. This is something that has been a bit peculiar about the style of government of this particular administration, the Modi administration. And that is that a lot of things are centralized in the Prime Minister's office that in the Indian system has traditionally involved dispersed cabinet responsibility. And we believe that that's really ours is a more efficient way of working, because you're using the talents of all your ministers. Whereas here it seems as if there is only one minister, and that's the Prime Minister.
You've been a junior foreign minister in the past in the Union Cabinet. What would you have done differently?
Now, that I think would be extremely presumptuous of me to say, and I don't want to get into that kind of thing or what I would have done. The fact is that those who are in power have the responsibility. They have the confidential information that we sitting in opposition don't have, even though I do get briefings from the Foreign Ministry as chairman of the committee. Obviously, we don't get classified information, and a lot of that remains the basis on which governments take actions. So let me not second guess what they have done, but let me say that I would like to have seen a more coherent Pakistan policy. It seems to us that the Prime Minister has been all over the place on Pakistan, and we have waxed hot and cold and lukewarm alternatively without any understanding. I did find myself saying that there are more ups and downs on Pakistan than in a child's yo-yo. And sadly, that is not healthy with such a complicated, tense and fraught relationship across the border.
Interesting that you brought up Pakistan, because I wanted to speak to you about Pakistan as well. And before we go into the break, let me just finish this segment by talking to you about Pakistan. Even with the NSG, we saw Pakistan needling India and saying that, it was us who coaxed China into stonewalling India's membership into the NSG. So how do you deal with a neighbor like Pakistan?
Well, it's not easy, and it's not easy at several levels. And there's a first fundamental question which the Prime Minister has himself recently raised, that how on earth do you know who you're talking to, and whether the people you're talking to have the authority that you have in your own government. We are a civilian government, we talk to civilian governments. But if there is a military standing as a big shadow behind the civilian government, pulling the strings and deciding what lines a civilian government cannot cross, and sometimes writing the script for the civilian government, or snatching the script from the civilian government's hands and tearing it up, then you have a problem when you have dialogue with that country. That is the biggest frustration for anybody dealing with Pakistan. We've seen the Americans often cutting through this and just directly dealing with the generals. We can't do that. I mean, that's that would be insulting and humiliating to the civilian government, but equally important, it's in our interest to shore up whatever civilian voices and civilian authority that might exist in that country. The other challenge of dealing with Pakistan is the one that is epitomized in that argument that you can't make peace when a gun is pointed at your head. Every time that a gesture of peace is made by India, it seems that a bomb goes off, or several bombs go off, or an attack comes in, or terrorists are crossing the border with impunity. These are not things that we can indefinitely put up with. At the same time, we can't neglect Pakistan. They are an even more ever-present reality than China, as I discussed at the beginning of our conversation. So my personal approach on this, as I've articulated in my book Pax Indica, would be to do what we can on the person-to-person front. That is, open up the space for person-to-person contact, be more generous with visas, for example, than they are. I don't buy the argument that will encourage terrorists, because none of the terrorists who have come to us applied for visas first. They came through other routes, including the ones of 2611. I think the ones who apply for visas are people who, by and large, have an interest in India, and in many cases will go away with enhanced goodwill about India, as I've seen in many, many Pakistanis. I'm yet to meet a Pakistani who's visited India and gone away hating us. They tend to be enamored of this country once they come here. We should open up that space. We should open up everything we can. Trade, commerce. I would even trade with these military-owned companies that are so influential in the Pakistani economy. Indeed. My argument is, let us broaden the space for peace and create more vested interests in peace. Indeed. In order to make it more and more difficult for that space to be narrowed and destroyed by the enemies of peace who are very much present in the armed establishment and the non-state actors, as they are called, that Pakistan seems to generate in large number.
It remains to be seen what the government does with Pakistan and how it deals with Pakistan. But on that note, we'll slip into a short break. On the other side, Dr. Tharoor will talk about the Congress party and where it is headed. Time for a short break now, but we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television in conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, the Congress party seems to be a sinking ship at the moment. You're just holding on to one large state of Karnataka. The bastions or the strongholds of the Congress seem to be going away from the Congress and into the hands of the BJP.
Look, this is the kind of, statement that led Mark Twain to say that having read an obituary about himself, he said, reports of my death are exaggerated because he was still alive. And I would say the same about the Congress party. In politics, as we know from previous experience, the fortunes of political parties are cyclical. Things go up and down. The Congress has had downs before, not as bad as it has right now.
Exactly, not
this
as bad
is the West,
as it, yes.
But there's always different stages, as it were, for good news and bad news. One can point to the present ruling party. How long ago was it that there were 2 members of the Rajya Sabha, of the Lok Sabha? We are in fact 45, so we're actually going to be leaping up from a bigger platform than they did when they rose. I would say that let's not get too carried away. There are various factors. State elections, genuinely, it seems to me anyway, are governed far more by local issues. And those local issues will vary from time to time, including patterns of anti-incumbency, including specific factors that do not necessarily dominate the minds of the same voters when they're looking at the general election. So for all of these reasons, there will be ups and downs. We are indeed ruling Karnataka and have just lost Kerala and Assam, but I would not at all be surprised to see us coming back in a number of states where we lost the last time around. If I were the Chief Minister of Rajasthan, I would not be sitting too comfortably in my chair, for example. I think that Madhya Pradesh, in the wake of the Vyapam scam, should really worry about the Congress upending the BJP government there. I don't think that the people of Maharashtra are doing terribly well under the present government of the BJP and the Shiv Sena, and so on and so forth. Even Mr. Narendra Modi's Gujarat, which has been seething with restiveness, could be hospitable ground to the Congress party. So let us not, after all, we surprised you all in Bihar with the Mahagathbandhan and where that went. I think we're capable of surprising the nation and certainly surprising the BJP in several more states to come.
But is the Congress happy playing second fiddle to some other regional party like it's done in Bihar, or for that matter, even in Tamil Nadu? We saw that the DMK took the lead and it was the Congress was playing second fiddle.
Look, we obviously would be happiest to go right back to 1952 when we won every state and won the centre. But that's not going to happen. There are political realities that change in our country, and Congress has celebrated the evolution of our democracy. We are proud of the fact that under the stewardship of successive governments, including a majority of Congress governments, let us say, that the nation has been able to evolve a very mature, complicated, but successful democracy. And in that process, yes, we've seen a number of different voices coming to the fore, which in the past were perhaps silenced by social realities, even social oppression, one might say. Politics and democracy have liberated, have given voice to the voiceless, have given the power of the ballot box to those who had numbers, therefore they have votes, but who didn't have power in our social order in the past. This is not something that the Congress can afford to be sad about. We have to adjust to that reality, and we have done so. As you said, we're an ally of a regional party in Tamil Nadu, we're an ally of a regional party in Bihar, but at the same time, we have lead status in a number of coalition arrangements in other places. We are the largest opposition party today in Bengal, which we were something that wasn't the case for the last couple of elections. We are by far the alternative government in most of the states where we're not in power. Whether it's Kerala and Assam, where we just lost power and we are the principal opposition, or in states where we lost power some time ago, like Madhya Pradesh and Orissa, we are still the principal opposition. So please don't write us off. We are the one party in this country with a truly credible national footprint. Even when we won only 44 seats in 2014, we won them everywhere. We may have only won 1 or 2 where we used to win a dozen or 20, but we won them in the north, the south, the southwest, the northeast, and that's something which honestly even the BJP can't claim at that time.
Don't start writing the obituary of the Congress party just yet, is what Dr. Tharoor is saying. But, local issues and state assembly elections aside, there are several Congress leaders who have defected from the party and have joined either regional parties or the
Three or four.
BJP
Three or
or the
four.
BJP. And we've seen that happen over a period of time. I mean, it's happening gradually. Is that something that worries you? Is that something that you're concerned about?
Look, I mean, you talked about a sinking ship and you know about the rats who jump off from the sinking ship. I don't mean to insult the individuals who may have had their own reasons for the decisions they've made, but the fact is that there are people who are in politics only to enjoy the sunny side. And so if they discover that they're attached to a party that is lost, they would rather be with the party that's in power, and off they go. I must say that it's difficult for us to draw a nationwide pattern from this. If you speak of leaders, people with a credible political base and mass following, you're only talking yet about a handful of people.
Talking about leaders, there are several leaders within the Congress party after what happened in the recently held state elections who called for fresh leadership, who called for a release of a breath of fresh air. Is that going to happen? When is it going to happen?
So that was exactly the point I was about to make, that once these folks have left, it actually enhances the opportunity to revive and rejuvenate the party. In some ways, in every Indian party, partly because of our understandable reverence for seniority and age, the one challenge that most parties have faced is how to bring young blood into these parties. And usually once the young blood does come in, as for example in the Congress party in Kerala 40 years ago, or in Assam with the students movement 30 years ago and so on, once they come in, they stay there and they grow old and they're still perennially the leaders of the party. How do we get in people who are today what those people were 30, 40 years ago? That is the question every party faces, and we are absolutely no exception. But I would say that if you look at Kerala, for example, where we've just defeated, a majority of our MLAs are young MLAs, are young people. And so we can be, it seems to me, a credible youthful face in Kerala.
Face, yes, but is it time for a change at the helm?
Well, I think that there is serious thought being given to changes up and down the entire structure of the party. Certainly, I'm one of those who called for a serious amount of change because I believe that we've had enough time to introspect, and now we need to shake up the party a little bit in order to be able to present a new and energetic face and voice to the public when the time comes.
And who's that new and energetic face going to be?
I think it's going to be an entire team and not just an individual. As an individual, I think the torch will be passed to a new generation at the head of the party, and that is going to be the present Vice President, Rahul Gandhi. But I think around him, you're going to see a lot of young people, or younger people than
do you see yourself there?
Alas, I seem to have passed my shelf life. I'm one of these odd people who came in after having had a full career outside politics. And therefore, I was too new to be senior at one stage, and now I'm too old to be junior and be a young face. So I'm the wrong example to take. But there will be people younger than me who will have, I think, important roles in the leadership.
Indeed.
And I think that many of those who have made a valuable contribution to the party should be respected for the contributions they made over the years. But at the same time, others should be given an opportunity to show what they can do.
We're coming to the end of the program, and before I go, I want to talk to you about something you've done as an MP. You know, there are a couple of pending bills that you have in Parliament, and there's a bill that you want to bring in the upcoming session of Parliament as well. Would you like to speak about that?
Yes, indeed. Well, you know, I've tried to move to decriminalize Section 377, which I think is an embarrassment to us as a democracy. It's about constitutional freedoms, but not about sex. However, that did not, in fact, get introduced because of the opposition of members of the ruling party. I did successfully introduce a bill on refugee and asylum law, which I think is overdue. It's a disgrace that a country with such a generous policy to refugees has not, in fact, got a law on the books. I think we need to do that. I've also got a bill on the sedition issue, which became such a prominent issue some months ago. We need to just scrap or redefine what sedition is all about and reduce it to incitement to violence and not criminalize speech. And in the current situation, I've written to the Prime Minister, along with 16 other MPs, asking for a road safety bill, saying that we have 400 people dying every day in India from road accidents. It's tragic. It's one of the worst figures in the world. And it's a crime that we're not more outraged about and not doing more about it. The bill has been hanging fire for years. We need to cut to the chase and improve road safety. Finally, I've also decided to put forward a private member's bill coming up in the House that will seek the direct election of town or city mayors and village panchayat chiefs. What I'm talking about is an executive head with the authority, the budget, the secure term of office to actually make a difference. We have too many checks and balances thanks to the parliamentary system we took from the British. Nobody has any authority to do anything. You've got mayors who are merely glorified chairmen of municipal committees. And it seems to me that if we want to make the kind of progress that this country is crying for, we need directly elected chief executives at all levels. And let's start at the bottom.
Let's hope that some of these things actually fructify and we see some kind of forward movement in the near future. But Dr. Tharoor, before I let you go, one final question, because there's another bit of news that's been making headlines across the world, and that's Brexit and your thoughts on it.
Well, I think that Brexit is definitely a sign that the trends of the last 20 odd years, 25 years of globalization, the erosion of borders, people coming together, this entire world system that we've all been celebrating, particularly on the economic side, that has created more losers than winners, and the losers are fighting back. In the developed world, the complication is accentuated by their resistance to immigration, whether it's refugees, whether it's migrants coming in. Somehow a sort of nativism is reasserting itself. One of the most potent slogans of the Brexit campaigners was, let's take back control of our country. Mr. Trump in America is running around saying, let's make America great again, as if what is not making America great can be blamed on foreigners and outside influences. This kind of increasing insularity, this searching for security in a world of uncertainties, where you feel you've lost control over the daily assumptions of your life, that is animating more and more people. I think we're seeing similar phenomena in pretty much every Western country. You've got far-right parties coming up in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Austria. They nearly won the presidency. 0.5% was all that separated them from the winner. Hungary has this. So all of this happening is something the world needs to worry about, because if we go back once again into states behind walls, the last time that happened was in the 1930s. It gave us a depression and a world war. Indeed. I would not like to see that happen again.
Sure. We can go on talking about all these issues and we can keep speaking, but unfortunately we've run out of time and we've come to the end of the program. Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor, for being with us on To The Point this week, and much appreciate you being with us on the program.
Thank you, Frank.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.